All right. Um, yeah, good morning, everyone. So, yeah, life update is always interesting. The life updates are, I never know what to do with the life updates, but I guess what I'll do with a life update is that I have a couple of things that I feel like have been on my mind. And then, yeah, okay. So, school started for me, and I have a lot of classes. I have a lot of classes, and I think it's putting a strain on my. It's putting a lot of strain on my previous commitments, right? Like my my commitments of like book clubs and stuff that I'm in, and discussion groups that I'm in, and I want to be active in, but I legitimately can't. And I'm not. I think well, it's not that I can't, but I think I just won't be able to be as active and present in attendance as I usually am. So that's something I'm struggling with, mainly because I know that you know these are people that I kind of promised in a kind of implicit way through agreement to attend and so on, but uh it's really hard right now, um, especially just kind of looking at the course load and everything that I'm doing. Um, and then of course there's always this other element where it's like, I also want time to do my own work, my own reading and my own thinking. But as usual, when school starts, at least this specific semester, it's always difficult to do any of those things. It's difficult for me to just, have my side reading and do my side thinking. And then it's also difficult for me simultaneously to also try to contribute to the commitments I already have, like some book clubs and readings that I have to do. Um, and it's difficult. And I hate, I hate being in that position to have to decline and say I can't attend. And for me, it's just very unfortunate, really. Um, but yeah, so that's one element of my life that's kind of been happening. The the other thing is I've been thinking about this problem, and I don't want to think solutions, but I'm just going to describe the problem because I think it's something that needs I think it's a problem that needs discussion, not solutions, but I just want to think through this problem. So the problem that I'm having, or I'm currently experiencing, is the discrepancy between people that read philosophy, or you could say, I won't even say philosophy, I'll just say like psychoanalysis, philosophy, those kind of realms, versus people that don't necessarily read philosophy or familiar with the psychoanalytic kind of discourse. Um, and so what I've noticed is that I don't know. And I hate saying these terms, like I don't know what to do. I mean, there is a sense, but there is a real negativity to all of this. So I don't want to say I don't know what to do, because there's a real sense of I don't know what to do, but I don't think that I need to do anything. I don't think I need to do anything. Yeah. Okay. But okay. So let me describe the problem. So I've noticed in my recent experiences that as I get closer to someone on a more intimate level, something was said to me, which was that they desire philosophy because they essentially desire me, right? They find me important, and so therefore they also find philosophy important. So they also feel that it's necessary to engage to in my intellectual activities, or whatever you want to call them, uh, on some level. Now the discrepancy is that, and this takes context for the person. I really don't want to say much about this person on like a kind of open way, but uh, I will say that the context of the situation is that they struggle with the discourse of the dialogue of philosophical thinking, mainly because philosophical thinking or psychoanalytic thinking, for them comes off very aggressive, in the sense of like it almost feels as if I'm trying to impose some type of position that they should accept. Now, of course, that's not something that I actually want, but I noticed that it actually does get a little bit confusing because what's the difference between like trying to convince somebody and then trying to I guess constantly make somebody think about a position, right? Like what's that difference? um and in my opinion, it probably feels the same for somebody. Like it probably feels the same, when you are expressing an idea. It probably does feel the same as like trying to convince them as somebody, versus trying to convince somebody an idea, versus trying to argue an idea that you feel. I mean, well, I won't phrase it like that, but like you're trying to restate an idea so that way you can get them to think about this position, right? Now, does this necessarily lead them to be convinced of this position? um, should this be the goal, to convince them of this position? In my opinion, I state positions to provoke thinking about a situation and a position, but for people that don't read philosophy, that are not, familiar with psychoanalytic thinking, um, they feel like they're being pushed a position that they should be accept, and that's very difficult. Hi, Sam. um, and yeah, I'm just trying to think through that issue. I'm not trying to come up with solutions, but I just think that there is uh I noticed that it's very hard to discern that, I think. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at. It's very difficult to discern this idea between, I mean, I know Daniel Garner makes a good distinction between like debate and like discussion. Um but I think the problem is that if the other if the other determines in some fashion that the position that you're stating feels almost like a debate versus discussion, it's very difficult to be like, this is discussion, not a debate, right? um because I think the one element missing in this is power dynamics. What are the differences between power dynamics in discussion and debates? And this is something that I've also noticed in like some book clubs too, where it's like people don't want to state opinions or ideas because the people that are talking in the groups, um, they perceive them as aggressively dominating the room, meaning like they can tell that this person is well read, they have a bunch of theories, they have good convincing arguments, and so it prevents them from wanting to speak up and say something against it, or something uh contrary to that, right? And it can be, again, it's the setting is like a discussion, not a debate, but I think the subjective experience is that it feels like a debate. It feels like they have to say something, but then they realize, like, I don't have anything to counter what the other person is saying. And I think that has to do with the kind of thinking, and it's weird because I can't really control, and it's very difficult to control discussions where the other doesn't feel threatened in some type of way, about some type of discourse, about possibly being imposed by some position. Um, and I think these differences I think what I'm trying to get at, it's very clear to me, at least in some sense, that we can't control these conditions and perceptions. Because I think the more that I talk to said person, and they've admitted that what it is that it makes them feel intellectually inferior and inadequate. Now, people can hear that and be like, well, that's their problem, you know? Um, but the thing is, it's not like their problem per se. It's our problem. What do I mean by our problem? I mean, saying it's our problem because actually we are in the same position. Like, we are both inadequately inferior, um in terms of knowledge and everything. I think the problem is that the individual can't discern, doesn't know what to do with the information, right? For example, like, if somebody introduces a topic to you and you feel like there's something wrong with those presuppositions or the premises laid out by the person speaking, it's very difficult. And if you don't have the language for it, and this is like sort of the unbearable negativity of it all, is that if you don't have the language for it, um, basically it just feels like you're just taking it. You're just taking whatever they're saying, and it comes down to a kind of either or situation where it's like, okay, either I have to accept it or reject it. Um, and especially if they don't have the language to push back against the premises. And I think that's the most difficult thing, is that most of the time we don't have the language to push back against what is being said. Um, and it kind of reminds me of something that Plato said, actually, in one of the dialogues. I think it was Phaedo. Yeah, probably Phaedo. Where he says that an argument, when an argument is deemed insufficient, it's not because the argument itself is insufficient. It's actually because the way you're thinking, like, basically the way you are thinking about it is insufficient. Like, the way you think about the idea needs improving, basically. Um, but what's ironic is that all ideas are going to be insufficient anyways. But I've noticed that when it comes to discussions, you can't control the dynamics of how power is perceived. Even though on a fundamental level, we have a sort of like core negativity, a core lack that we can relate to. Um, and I think it's hard to express that to others that already feel inadequate because they perceive you as already superior, right? Superior in the dialogue, superior in conversation, because they perceive you as well read. Um, you're coming from some type of background. Like, it's this imposition of authority that they're already giving you, because they can already, because they're basically encountering their own negativity through you, and that makes them feel inadequate. But the problem with this is, like, it's hard to express that actually it's not that I'm superior or the other's superior. Is that we're all inadequate. We all have this sort of core negativity that is unbearable to face, and it's very difficult to express that. And I don't, I don't think. I mean, there's no solution to that other than the fact that it's like, yes, I relate to you to that, because that is what, like, there is, like, it's basically a kind of illusion to think that I know more, or the other knows more, or something like that. Um, but I just noticed that it's very difficult to kind of like navigate and sort of hold on to that negativity. Um, and there's several ways of what I mean by holding on to that negativity, which is the fact that you're probably never going to convince the person that you're you're never going to convince. I find it almost unrealistic to say that you would be able to convince the other that you are not superior in some way, or inferior in some way. I phrased that wrong. You're still on the same level of inferiority and lack, um, as the other. And I think so. I think that's a core that, for me, what that shows for me is that that's a core negativity, or that's a kind of unbearable negativity that I would have to face when I discuss with people that are not familiar with philosophy and psychoanalysis. Um, and the same thing with the others that are not acquainted with these fields of study. Um, I hate saying fields of study. I'm sorry, but just to play with the example, um, with the fields of study, the people that don't read philosophy and psychoanalysis, they also have to bear that negativity of what they perceive as someone being superior or something, even though in my opinion it would be not true, but they are in contact with something that is real, and it's disturbing and uncomfortable. And the same thing with me, because I, from the other end, as I sort of like cultivating these dialogues with people that don't read this stuff, um, I understand that the core negativity that I need to face is that they don't see me on the same visceral level of negativity that they are experiencing, you know, which is the fact that I also have to face my negativity, my lack, my uncertainty, and so on. And it's very hard to argue out of that, or to convince them of that. I mean, I would even say, like, you're not going to convince them of this. You're just not going to, because they're thinking quantitatively, and they're looking at your mode of speech, the way you talk, and they can tell you're comfortable with speaking. They can tell that you know the material, or at least they feel like they know the material. See, that's the difference. It's all perceived knowing, perceived, you know, a kind of authority in speaking that cultivates that negativity for them, and that sense of inferiority that they feel like they can't engage in dialogue. But also from, again, from the other end, is that you start to see that you can't convince them away from that position, that you can't convince them away from perceiving it that way. And that is a kind of unbearable negativity that I or others would have to face, that are in that position. And I don't think there's anything that you can do. Um, of course, what becomes difficult in having conversations like this, and maybe even personal relationships, is the fact that um, you're going to feel pressured to want to act, and you're going to feel pressure to want to give a solution or find some remedy to deal with this problem. Um, but I think that, and this is the part that's so difficult, because it's like, even the act of like trying to convince somebody, like, hey, look, it's actually the core negativity and the lack that connects us. Like, this is what it is. Um, I mean, sure, you can try, but I mean, ultimately, I'm not optimistic about that understanding. I mean, I think Kierkegaard actually probably made the best pessimistic response to the way others perceive advice, or sort of complimentary things. And Kierkegaard says this, where he says, actually, when you give advice to the other, they perceive that as you saying, look, be better like me, be just like me. Um, and so you can tell automatically it's already an ironic position to even want to express and convince someone of, swaying this position. um but I think the only way that you convince someone, I would say, it's not even because of your own accord. I think it's just when the other understands that this is a part of the essential negativity of the discourse, basically. um I mean, that's how I don't want to say this word, I don't want to say overcame, but that's how I shifted my perspective on discussion with people that, clearly more well read than me. They're whatever, high up in their fields or whatever. Um, I don't want to give too much status to all that stuff, but once you realize that there's a core negativity to that, to discussion, to discourse, then that shifts your perspective. But I don't think anybody could have actually convinced me of that, because again, then you run into this weird thing where words lack wisdom and context for the individual to understand. And that's why we feel helpless in giving advice to others, because again, the words have no epistemic value in themselves to um, convince an individual. Um, to some extent, it's only when we both confront that core negativity together, um, socially, that you could say that our perspective shifts and we go, oh, yes, okay, here's the self realization. But it's a part of the process itself. Um, and this is something that I've been thinking about, because I think Cadell Ash wrote a Substack about the subject of loss. Well, it's based on Todd McGowan's idea that there's a difference between the subject of loss and the subject of lack. Um, and he's advocating to not confuse the two, because obviously the subject of lack is more fundamental than the subject of loss. But I've been thinking about this in the sense that actually I feel like the subject of loss is necessary for the individual to possibly realize that they are a subject of lack. Of course, I don't think you can convince somebody when they are a subject of loss, that they are a subject of lack. But I do think within the dialectic of the subject of loss, there is a possibility for them to realize that they are subject of lack if they pay attention to that negativity. But if the subject of loss is always consumed and fascinated with what was lost and wanting to regain that, then of course they will never understand that they are really a subject of lack. Um, but I think once the subject of loss realizes that they are that this wanting to regain something that was lost is sort of part of the fundamental constitution of the subject, that's when they would transition from subject of loss, a subject of loss to a subject of lack, in my opinion. But again, I don't think that's anything that we can do to convince them of that. It has to be something that is lived through, and there is no prescription, there is no teaching, no way of living to convince a subject of loss that they are a subject of lack. It has to be some type of, you could say negative experience, you could say act of grace, basically, which I would like to perceive grace as a sort of negative action, because it would result as a kind of double negation, right? Subject of loss to subject of lack. Um, but yeah, that's basically what I'm trying to say is, I don't think there is anything that you can do. I'm just trying to say that I think the transition is possible. Um, but obviously at the same time, like when I say possible, I mean that probably in the most pessimistic sense, in meaning like I don't really know what you could do to make it possible, right? Because there's just nothing that you can say. Like we're in a sort of helpless position. It to me, it's. I think if we take the death drive seriously, I think it would occur. What I would say occur naturally, and I hate saying that word like naturally, but I think it would just occur out of just consequence of the death drive itself. Um, but that's something that the individual has to realize. I can't convince them of that. And I can't do anything to prescribe that and tell them that that's what would happen. Um, but yes, I would say once the individual realizes that core negativity, which again we can't set any prescription or standards for improving that. Um, yeah, but I think you get the gist. Anyways, yeah, that's basically the update. I guess you could say a minor update before I close on this is that I am a I am a student of U of A. Um, Currently a major in religious studies, minor in sociology. But I realized that my institution doesn't have a religious PhD program. Um, and I realized that they do have a sociology PhD program. So that is something that I'm actually entertaining. Um, Mainly because I think sociology is like probably the perfect field for me in the sense that I could probably combine anything I want into that field, philosophy, religion, psychoanalysis. And I feel like I would have a very fun time. So uh, I think yeah, I think fundamentally that's where I'm heading. Um, and I've been having a lot of fun thoughts about basically, I definitely want to be that person that puts sociology on that sort of critique stance and sort of like, just sort of just dismembers them because if I'm taking even Julie Reshi's work seriously, there is something about sociology that itself is a positive project, and that needs to be attacked too. As a whole, that field needs to be attacked as a whole. And I think there's been some people that have already done that in some sense. I forgot his name. I think it's Rizabel or something. It's a book called Lacan and American Sociology or something like that. Lacan and Sociology, but it's a very good critique. I've only read like I think the first chapter or two. Um, well, I think I'm like halfway in chapter two, but I think I kind of again school took over, and I know I can't finish it. I just don't have time right now. Um, but yeah, I think his work will be beneficial to making that critique. Of course, it's more American centered, but I think as a whole, I would really attack sociology, even as a sociology PhD, because I think we deserve more. We need more ironic positions like that. We need to attack um, our own fields of study and sort of reveal that core. You could say I like to use Daniel Garner's statement, that core irony, or maybe in Julie Reshi's kind of words, that core negativity, that sort of undialecticizable core. That's what we need to expose in some sense. Um, but yeah, I mean, if you guys have any questions, I mean, this is life update. I don't think there would be any questions, but but who knows? I don't really know if people ask questions about life updates, but sure. I mean, I'm willing to give, I don't know, 2-3 minutes for people to ask a question or something. But other than that, I probably will go. So yeah. Um, but I mean, while I wait a little bit longer, yeah, I mean, if I would just like to add another update to it, I don't have. I mean, I haven't written anything in a while, uh, and I'm very confused by that kind of experience because I usually do write, and I noticed for some reason that after I read Julie Reshi's book Negative Psychoanalysis, for some reason I basically went through this weird, very uncomfortable phase where I was like, I don't want to write anything. I don't even want to fucking read anything. Um, and I don't think it has anything to do. I mean, maybe some relation to her book, but I don't think it has anything to do with it. I was just like, I don't know. And I'm still in that position right now. Like I'm reading some, but I haven't written anything, and I'm very confused by that kind of thing. Um, but it has made me think that like maybe I don't know. Maybe there's something. I think there's elements of not writing, of refraining from not writing, that may be crucial to sort of just confronting that kind of uncomfortable negativity and so on. Because I do think I've fooled myself for a while, thinking that I think I've used writing as a sort of like ailment to give myself some fantasy that I'm doing something, right? That my life is so mundane and typical that the writing itself can breathe life into something. Um, I think we need to go back, and maybe this is Derrida's fault. I don't know, because Derrida was trying to argue that writing is not dead, it's living. Um, but I would like to go back to perceiving writing as dead. Maybe that is better. Maybe writing should be perceived as sort of the way Julie Reshi talks about it, as a sort of living dead act. Um, and there is something dead about writing, and I think I would disagree with Derrida. I think there is something dead about writing, but of course, what's complicated is that when I'm talking about writing, I'm talking about physical writing, and Derrida doesn't actually, he's not explicitly talking about physical writing. He's talking about a different sense of writing, which may include that actual physical act of writing, but that's an argument to be had. But um, for the most part, I just mean in the context of active, actual writing. Um, and I would like to approach writing in a sort of living dead sense and kind of understand what that means, really understand what that means. And I think maybe it probably begins with the fact that it's just all kind of pointless, kind of useless to write. I think we've made writing like too much of a positive project, um, which has ironically prevented people from writing. If that makes any sense, because I think maybe writing should be perceived as like a negative act. Like it's just, you know, it, it's useless. It it has a kind of core negativity to it. Um, but I mean, there's obviously more conversations to be had about that. But anyways, yeah, I am done, and I will see you guys later. All right, take care, guys. Thanks for watching. Bye.